Passengers laughed, kids played, and flights boarded like any other morning, until one bark changed everything. A K9 named Rex suddenly broke formation, teeth bared, eyes locked on a single gray suitcase sliding across the belt. Within seconds, chaos erupted. Alarms blared, people screamed, and officers drew their weapons. But Rex refused to release his grip, growling like he was fighting death itself. Then came the sound that froze every heartbeat, a soft, muffled cry from inside the suitcase. Not a bomb, not a threat, something far more shocking. Within moments, the entire airport went silent, and what they discovered next left even the hardest officers in tears. This story will leave you breathless. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. It started like any other morning at the international airport. Sunlight streaming through tall glass windows, wheels of suitcases rolling across the polished floor, and the faint echo of boarding announcements filling the air. Families hugged, children waved tiny flags, and travelers hurried past each other, each lost in their own story. But among the crowd, one figure stood out, a German shepherd with piercing amber eyes and a badge on his black vest that read, Police, K9, Rex. Beside him walked Officer Mark Jensen, calm and focused, scanning the crowd with practiced precision. For 5 years, he and Rex had worked side by side, tracking narcotics, detecting explosives, and stopping threats before they began. They were a team built on trust and instinct, bonded by unspoken understanding. But that morning, Mark had no idea that Rex was about to change every life in that terminal. The day's routine was simple, a security sweep through the baggage claim area before the next wave of flights arrived. Rex moved with purpose, his nose low, tail straight, ears twitching at every sound. Mark followed, one hand lightly gripping the leash. Around them, passengers chattered in a dozen languages. The conveyor belts hummed and the metallic click of luggage wheels echoed. Everything felt ordinary until it didn't. Suddenly, Rex froze. His head snapped to the right, nostrils flaring as if catching a scent carried by the air. Mark noticed immediately. "What is it, boy?" he asked quietly. Rex didn't respond. He growled deep and low, his gaze locked on a gray suitcase sliding down the conveyor belt. Mark frowned. "Hold," he commanded, but Rex didn't move. The dog's muscles stiffened, his paws digging into the ground. In a split second, Rex lunged forward, teeth clamping onto the handle of the suitcase. The sudden movement startled everyone nearby. Passengers gasped. A woman screamed. An officer dropped his coffee. The bag tumbled off the belt as Rex snarled, refusing to let go. Mark's training kicked in instantly. "Back up, everyone back up," he shouted, waving his arm to clear the area. Within moments, alarms blared across the terminal. Security personnel rushed toward the scene, hands hovering near their radios and weapons. The once bustling terminal turned eerily still. Dozens of eyes fixed on the German shepherd, now growling over the suitcase like he'd found something deadly. Mark's pulse raced. Rex had never disobeyed him before. If he was reacting this strongly, it wasn't random. It was real. "Rex, release," Mark ordered, but the dog growled even louder, his eyes wild with warning. And then, amid the chaos, something faint echoed from inside the suitcase. A soft, almost imperceptible sound. It wasn't a tick. It wasn't metal. It was something alive. Mark's breath caught. Every officer froze, and for the first time that day, the bustling airport fell into complete silence. Long before that morning, Rex wasn't just any K9. He was a legend in the making. Trained at one of the toughest police academies in the country, he'd earned his reputation as a fearless, disciplined, and impossibly intelligent dog. But it wasn't just his strength or skill that set him apart. It was his heart. And the one man who understood it best was Officer Mark Jensen, his handler, his partner, and his only family. Mark had seen countless officers come and go in his years of service, but none had a bond like he did with Rex. Their connection went beyond commands and rewards. It was trust. Mark often said, "When Rex looks at me, I don't see an animal. I see a soul that listens better than most humans." In quiet moments, that bond was clear. Every morning before duty, Mark would kneel beside Rex, fastening his black K9 vest with the same care a soldier gives his armor. "Let's keep them safe, buddy," he'd whisper, patting his neck gently. Rex would nudge his hand with a soft grunt. his silent promise that he was ready. At home, the two lived a life of quiet routine. Rex would rest by the door when Mark cleaned his boots, waiting patiently for their next call. Sometimes when nightmares of past cases woke Mark in the middle of the night, Rex would rest his head on his chest, grounding him without a word. They weren't just partners. They were brothers in uniform. That morning at the airport had started the same way. Calm, steady, predictable. The team gathered at Security Checkpoint B for their routine briefing. Mark checked his radio, his firearm, and Rex's leash. Everything felt perfectly ordinary. No one imagined that within minutes the most routine sweep would turn into one of the most unforgettable incidents in airport history. As Rex moved ahead through the crowd, Mark caught a glimpse of sunlight reflecting off the floor, and for a brief second he smiled. He had no idea that this would be the last calm moment before chaos broke loose, because while the rest of the team laughed and chatted casually, Rex's ears flicked toward the distant hum of conveyor belts and that faint rhythm that would soon deliver the gray suitcase no one expected. Suitcase that would make the world stop. The terminal buzzed with the usual chaos. Boarding calls echoing through the intercom. Travelers dragging their luggage across gleaming floors. Coffee cups clinking against counters. It was the kind of busy morning that made security officers invisible until something went wrong. For Mark Jensen and Rex, that was just how they liked it. Calm before anything unpredictable. Rex trotted beside Mark with his signature confidence, nose twitching as he absorbed 1,000 different scents at once. To the untrained eye, he looked calm, but every movement of his head and every flick of his ears meant calculation. The German Shepherd was reading the airport like a book. Every perfume, every trace of food, every metallic tang that hinted at danger. Mark scanned the area, keeping pace. "Let's sweep the baggage claim first," he said to the nearby officers, then moved to customs. Rex's leash was loose in his hand, a reflection of trust more than control. He didn't need to pull. Rex knew his duty like a seasoned professional. They passed by the baggage conveyor belts where luggage rolled in an endless rhythm of gray and black cases. Tourists leaned over, searching for their belongings, while a child nearby pointed excitedly at Rex. "Look, Mommy, a police dog," she shouted. Rex glanced at her briefly, then looked away. Focused, composed, alert. The officers chuckled. "You've got a fan club again," one of them teased. Mark smiled faintly. "He earns it." Every few minutes, Rex would pause, sniff the air, and move on. Nothing unusual. No threats. Just the low hum of machines and the smell of jet fuel seeping faintly from the tarmac beyond the glass. Everything was normal, perfectly, frustratingly normal. Mark exhaled slowly. Routine days were good. They meant safety. But deep down, part of him knew that calm never lasted long in their line of work. "Come on, partner," he murmured. "Let's finish this sweep and grab a coffee." As they moved toward the far end of the terminal, Rex suddenly stopped, ears perking up. His tail stiffened, not wagging, not relaxed. His head tilted slightly, nostrils flaring like he'd caught a faint whisper in the air that no human could hear. Mark didn't notice yet. He was scanning a traveler's ID at the checkpoint when Rex's quiet stance turned rigid. The conveyor belt behind him hummed louder, carrying a new batch of arriving luggage, one of them, a gray suitcase that looked no different from the rest, at least not yet, because in less than a minute, Rex would prove that even an ordinary patrol could become the start of something extraordinary. The soft hum of the conveyor belt filled the air, blending with the chatter of travelers waiting for their luggage. Mark stood near the edge, exchanging a few casual words with another officer. Everything still felt normal, a typical, uneventful shift. But for Rex, the world had shifted into focus. His nostrils flared, pupils dilated, and every hair along his back stood like tiny warning signals. Something wasn't right. The German Shepherd took one step forward, his body low and tense. His ears twitched toward the gray suitcase sliding slowly along the conveyor, blending among dozens of others. It looked harmless, the kind of bag you'd see on any flight, tagged and ordinary. But Rex's instinct screamed otherwise. Mark noticed the sudden stiffness. "Rex?" he said softly, his voice carrying that hint of curiosity only handlers develop after years of trust. Rex didn't look at him. His focus was locked entirely on that one suitcase. The air around him seemed to tighten. Mark's expression changed. He had seen Rex act like this before. Once at a cargo checkpoint where the dog had detected explosives sealed beneath layers of metal. Another time during a narcotics sweep, Rex had found drugs hidden inside hollowed-out machinery. Every time Rex froze like this, it meant something. "Easy, boy," Mark murmured. But Rex wasn't listening. His lips curled slightly, a growl rumbling deep in his throat. Passengers nearby began to take notice. A man holding a coffee cup paused mid-sip. A mother tightened her grip on her child's hand. One of the junior officers frowned. "He's reacting to that bag?" Mark's voice dropped low. "Looks like it." The gray suitcase rolled closer inch by inch until it passed directly in front of Rex. The dog didn't hesitate. In a burst of movement, he lunged forward, front paws slamming onto the conveyor. His teeth clamped down on the suitcase handle, jerking it off the moving belt. "Rex, heel!" Mark shouted, but Rex refused. His growl deepened, echoing across the hall. Startled passengers jumped back, and a wave of confusion spread through the terminal. The suitcase hit the floor with a thud. For a moment, time froze. Then came a faint, muffled sound from inside, soft, rhythmic, almost like breathing. Officers exchanged uneasy looks. "Is that—" one of them whispered, but the words trailed off. Mark's pulse raced. His instincts told him to trust Rex. "Clear the area," he ordered. "Now." People scattered as alarms began to sound. Uniformed officers rushed forward, forming a perimeter. Rex stood over the suitcase, chest heaving, his eyes fierce but filled with something deeper. Urgency. Mark crouched beside him, voice trembling. "What did you find, boy?" Rex didn't move. He just kept his gaze fixed on the suitcase, and then came another faint sound from within. Weaker this time, but unmistakably alive. Mark's heart dropped. "Oh my God," he whispered. The entire airport froze, and in that silence everyone knew. This was no ordinary suitcase. The next few seconds were pure chaos. The moment Rex's teeth locked onto the suitcase, the rhythm of the airport shattered like glass. People screamed, coffee cups hit the floor, and luggage tumbled off the conveyor as passengers scattered in every direction. What had been a hum of conversation turned into a wave of terrified noise echoing through the terminal. "Everyone move back! Clear the area now!" Officer Mark Jensen shouted, his voice cutting through the panic. His heart pounded in his chest as he held Rex's leash tight, trying to control the powerful dog. But Rex refused to let go, his growl low and deep. His eyes locked on the gray suitcase like a predator guarding its prey. Security alarms began to wail, flashing red lights painting the white walls in a pattern of danger. Overhead, the intercom stuttered as airport control tried to make sense of what was happening. "Attention passengers. Please remain calm and follow security instructions." But no one was calm. Fear spread faster than the sound of the alarms. A woman clutched her child, pulling him behind a row of chairs. A man in a business suit ducked behind a pillar, peeking out with wide, trembling eyes. Dozens of phones came up as people started recording, capturing the terrifying scene unfolding before them. Mark moved closer, crouching near Rex but keeping distance from the bag. "Rex, what do you have there, buddy?" he said, trying to sound calm though every nerve screamed danger. He could see it in Rex's posture. This wasn't aggression, it was desperation. The dog was warning them. Another officer, pale-faced, approached carefully. "Could be an explosive," he muttered, reaching for his radio. "We should evacuate the terminal." "Negative," Mark snapped. "We isolate first. No sudden moves until the bomb unit gets here." Rex growled louder, tugging the suitcase slightly. The bag shifted, landing flat with a dull thud. And then came that faint sound again. Everyone froze. It was soft, muffled, but distinctly human. Mark's breath hitched. "Wait, did anyone else hear that?" A hush fell over the group. Even the alarm seemed distant now. Rex whined, lowering his body, nose pressed to the suitcase as if pleading with Mark to understand. "Get the bomb squad now," Mark ordered, his voice shaking. Officers moved quickly, clearing the area, radios crackling with tension. The once busy airport now felt like a ghost town, empty, cold, and waiting. Mark kept his eyes on the suitcase, his heart pounding in his throat. Every instinct told him this wasn't a threat. It was something else, something alive. Rex took a small step forward and let out a soft, heart-wrenching whimper. Mark had seen that look before. Not in combat, not in detection, but in compassion. Whatever was inside that suitcase, Rex knew it needed saving. The echo of Rex's growl faded into silence. replaced by the faint hum of the conveyor belt slowing to a stop. Every eye in the terminal was fixed on that single gray suitcase lying on the floor. Motionless, ordinary, yet somehow terrifying. The flashing red lights painted the scene like a warning. No one dared to move. Mark crouched lower, his breath coming slow and careful. "Rex, easy," he murmured. The dog's ears were pressed forward, body tense, tail low. He wasn't showing aggression anymore, and he was listening. The change in his posture was subtle but clear. Whatever Rex had sensed, it wasn't danger. It was something fragile. Mark leaned closer, his pulse quickening. For a moment, there was nothing. Just the faint buzz of fluorescent lights overhead and the distant chatter of confused passengers held back by security tape. Then it happened again, a sound. It was soft. Too soft for most to hear. A tiny whimper. Mark froze. His eyes darted to the officers around him. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. One of them nodded, face pale. "Yeah, sounded like crying." The room went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Rex stepped closer to the suitcase, sniffing urgently, then pawed at it, whining softly. That sound again, a faint, rhythmic alive. Mark's throat tightened. It couldn't be. It shouldn't be. But it was unmistakable now. A tiny cry muffled by layers of fabric and zippers. "Everyone, hold position," Mark barked. "Do not touch the bag." The bomb squad arrived seconds later. Armored suits, scanners, detection wands, but even they hesitated. "What's going on here?" the lead technician demanded. Mark pointed at the suitcase. "It's making sounds like a baby crying." The technician's stern expression faltered. "A baby?" Rex let out another soft whimper, pressing his nose gently against the bag. It was as if he was pleading with them to hurry. Mark's heart raced faster. Logic battled emotion. Every rule said don't touch potential explosives, but every instinct screamed save what's inside. The faint crying grew weaker. It wasn't just noise anymore. It was a plea for help. Mark clenched his jaw, eyes locked on the suitcase. "We need to open it," he said firmly. "Now." The technician hesitated. But one look at Rex, the unwavering stare of a hero dog who'd never been wrong, was enough. "Do it," the technician ordered. And as tools clinked and zippers began to open, every heartbeat in that terminal stopped. The air was thick with tension as the bomb squad took their positions around the suitcase. The lead technician crouched carefully, hands steady despite the sweat dripping down his forehead. The rest of the team formed a protective circle, weapons ready, while passengers huddled far behind the barricades, whispering in fear. Mark stood close with Rex by his side. The German shepherd was no longer growling. Instead, he trembled with restrained urgency, tail down, eyes locked on the suitcase. Mark felt it too, a gnawing sense that whatever lay inside wasn't a threat but a life depending on every second they wasted. "Standard explosive check first," the technician said, his voice clipped and professional. He ran a handheld scanner slowly along the surface of the bag. The small screen flickered with data. No readings. No trace of explosive compounds, nothing. Mark leaned in. "Anything?" "Negative," the man replied. "No signs of bomb materials, but I'm getting unusual heat readings. Something. Organic." The team exchanged confused glances. "Organic?" someone echoed. Mark's stomach twisted. He looked down at Rex, who let out a soft whine and pawed the ground. "You're trying to tell me something, aren't you, boy?" he murmured. Rex pressed against him, restless. The technician nodded toward Mark. "We're clear to open, but we need to follow containment procedure." Everyone stepped back. Mark obeyed, though his instincts screamed to stay close. Two bomb techs carefully unclipped the suitcase locks. The sound of metal snapping open echoed through the silent terminal. One of them slowly lifted the lid, only halfway at first, ready to retreat if needed. Rex took a cautious step forward, nose twitching. The faint muffled sound from inside grew clearer. "It's crying," one of the officers whispered, disbelief in his voice. The technician's hands froze. "Get medics ready, now," he barked. Another officer sprinted for the radio. Mark couldn't hold back any longer. He knelt beside the suitcase as the lid opened fully. Inside was a pile of blankets, old, worn, and shaking slightly with movement. Rex let out a sharp bark, as if confirming what everyone feared to believe. Mark reached out, his hands trembling. "Please, God," he whispered. He carefully pulled back the top layer of fabric, and the moment he saw what was underneath, His breath caught in his chest. Every officer around him gasped. Lying inside the suitcase was a baby, barely a few weeks old, weak, crying softly, its tiny hand clutching the edge of the blanket. Rex sat down beside it, whining gently. The airport fell utterly silent. The sound of that tiny cry pierced the silence like a blade through glass. Every officer, every bystander, even the bomb squad froze, staring in disbelief at the small, fragile life lying inside the gray suitcase. For a moment, time itself seemed to stop. The alarms faded, the noise of the airport disappeared, and all that remained was the soft, desperate cry of a baby struggling to breathe. Mark's knees felt weak as he leaned closer. "Oh my God," he whispered. His hands shook as he carefully lifted the blanket, revealing a newborn, its skin pale, lips trembling, eyes barely open. The baby's body was wrapped tightly, almost too tightly, as if someone had tried to keep it warm but hidden. Rex moved closer, his nose brushing gently against the baby's hand. The tiny fingers instinctively curled around his fur. The sight hit Mark like a wave, raw, human, unexplainable. A K9 dog had just saved a life that no human had even realized was in danger. "Get medical here now," Mark shouted, snapping out of shock. "We need oxygen and thermal blankets immediately." The lead bomb technician tore off his protective gloves and grabbed the radio. "This is Squad Alpha. It's not a device. Repeat, it's not a device. We have an infant. I repeat, a live infant." The entire terminal seemed to exhale in unison. Gasps, sobs, murmurs rippled through the crowd as people realized what had just happened. Some clutched their mouths in disbelief. Others wiped tears from their eyes. Mark cradled the baby in his arms, holding it close to his chest. The tiny body was trembling, breath shallow and quick. "Hang in there, little one," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "You're safe now." Rex stayed right beside him, his eyes full of focus and empathy. He didn't bark, didn't move, and he simply stood guard, his presence steady and protective. The air around them felt different now. Not tense, but sacred. A paramedic team rushed in carrying medical kits in a small portable incubator. "We've got it," the lead medic said, kneeling beside Mark. They quickly checked the baby's pulse, oxygen levels, and temperature. "Weak but alive. We need to get this child to the hospital immediately." Mark nodded, his throat tightening. As the medics worked, he looked down at Rex. "You knew," he murmured. "You knew before any of us." Rex tilted his head as if understanding. When the paramedics lifted the baby into their arms, the terminal burst into quiet applause. Strangers wept openly. Some recorded the moment, but most simply stood in awe of what they had witnessed. A miracle uncovered by instinct and loyalty. As the ambulance doors closed outside, Mark placed a hand on Rex's head. "Good work, partner," he said softly. "You just saved a life." Rex wagged his tail once, silently proud, and as the sirens faded into the distance, one truth remained. That gray suitcase, once feared for danger, had carried the most fragile form of life. A miracle only a dog could sense. The ambulance tore through the airport gates, its sirens slicing through the heavy silence that lingered behind. Mark stood outside, still trembling from what had just happened, his uniform streaked with sweat and dust. Rex sat beside him, eyes fixed on the fading red lights of the ambulance. Around them, officers whispered, still struggling to comprehend the miracle they had just witnessed. Inside that suitcase had been a living, breathing infant, abandoned, suffocating, moments away from death. If Rex hadn't intervened, if he hadn't bitten that bag exactly when he did, the baby would never have been found. Mark couldn't shake the thought from his mind. "Seconds," he muttered to himself. "Just seconds, and it would have been too late." One of the paramedics returned briefly to the terminal, face pale but eyes bright. "The baby's stable for now," he said breathlessly. "Still weak but alive. You guys saved a life today." Mark exhaled, the tension finally breaking. He crouched beside Rex, gently rubbing his neck. "You did this, buddy. You heard what no one else could." Rex leaned into his hand, tail swishing softly. But questions began to rise. Who would do this? One officer asked, scanning the nearby security footage screens. "A newborn. Left in a suitcase." Mark's expression hardened. "Find out. Pull every camera feed from the last hour." The airport control room buzzed with activity. Dozens of screens flickered with video feeds showing passengers, check-in counters, and baggage drops. Officers replayed every angle, looking for the moment that Suitcase had entered the system. Then finally, one of them froze the footage. "There!" a voice called out. Everyone crowded around. On screen, a woman appeared, handy mid-20s, wearing a loose gray hoodie and sunglasses. She moved quickly, avoiding eye contact, dragging the same gray suitcase beside her. Her hands trembled as she placed it on the conveyor belt, glancing around nervously before slipping away into the crowd. Mark felt a pang of unease. Zoom in. The footage sharpened. Her expression was visible now. Not cold, not calculated, but terrified. Her lips were trembling, her face pale as if she'd been crying. "She looks scared," one of the officers murmured. "Or guilty," another countered. Mark didn't answer. He knew that look. Not of a criminal, but of someone cornered by life. "Get facial recognition running," he ordered quietly. "We find her before she disappears." Rex barked once, a deep, certain sound, as if echoing Mark's determination. As the officers scrambled to identify the mysterious woman, Mark stood still for a moment, watching the conveyor belt start up again, the same one that had carried the bag of life and heartbreak. Somewhere out there, a mother was running. And Mark could feel it deep down. This wasn't just an act of cruelty. It was an act of desperation, and the truth behind it was going to shake everyone to the core. The terminal had finally reopened, but a heavy silence still hung in the air. People whispered as they passed the cordoned-off area, glancing toward the spot where Rex had discovered the suitcase. It was now just an empty space, but for those who'd witnessed it, it would never feel ordinary again. In the airport's security command room, the glow of dozens of monitors painted Mark's face in cold light. Footage from every corridor, every gate, and every baggage drop played in looping silence. The woman in the gray hoodie appeared again and again, always avoiding the cameras, head bowed, hands clutching that suitcase like it carried her soul. "Still no ID?" Mark asked, standing behind the tech officer. "Facial recognition's running through the national database," the man replied, typing rapidly. "No match yet. She could be using fake credentials or an alias." Mark crossed his arms. She didn't act like a criminal. Look at her body language. She wasn't calm. She was terrified. Another officer leaned over the desk. "If she abandoned a baby, that's enough to land her in prison for years. Desperate or not, she needs to answer for this." Mark said nothing. His gaze lingered on the frozen frame of the woman's trembling hands gripping the handle of the suitcase. He could almost feel her fear through the screen. Suddenly, a computer alert beeped. "Got something," the tech officer said, straightening. "She boarded through gate 12 about 40 minutes before the discovery. Paid cash for a domestic ticket but never got on the flight." "Track her trail," Mark ordered. "Every camera between gate 12 and baggage check." The footage jumped to another angle, a hallway leading to the airport exit. There she was again, moving fast, tears streaking her face. She stopped once at a restroom door, hesitated, then kept walking, disappearing into the crowd outside the terminal. "Damn it," one of the officers muttered. "She's gone." Mark's jaw tightened. No one just disappears. Check taxi logs, rideshare cameras, parking exits. Someone saw her. Rex let out a low bark from beside him, breaking the tension. Mark looked down at his partner. The German shepherd's ears were perked, his body alert. "Yeah, I know, buddy," Mark murmured. "We'll find her." As the search expanded, Mark couldn't shake the feeling gnawing at him. Something about this woman didn't fit the profile of a criminal. There was pain in her movements. Sorrow, not malice. And deep down, he feared that the story behind that suitcase wasn't one of crime, but of heartbreak. It took nearly 12 hours of non-stop searching before the break finally came. Mark sat in the airport's operations office, his eyes burning from lack of sleep. Rex curled beside his chair. The sun was beginning to rise outside, streaks of orange cutting through the glass walls. Just as fatigue started to settle in, the radio crackled. "Unit 4 to control. We've got a possible match." A woman fitting the description was spotted near Terminal Road, about 2 miles from the airport. "She's alone." "Looks shaken." Mark shot to his feet. "We're on our way." Minutes later, he and Rex arrived at the scene in an underpass near a service road. A lone woman sat on the cold pavement, arms wrapped tightly around her knees, her gray hoodie dirt-stained and torn. She wasn't running anymore. She just sat there, staring blankly at the ground as if the world had already ended. When she heard footsteps, she looked up, and the moment her eyes met Mark's, she froze. Her lips quivered, tears welling instantly. "Ma'am," Mark said gently, keeping his distance. "We're not here to hurt you. My name is Officer Jensen." Her breathing quickened. Is the baby alive?" Her voice cracked on the last word. Mark nodded slowly. "Alive, in the hospital, safe." The woman broke. She covered her face with her hands and sobbed. Not the sound of guilt, but of release. The kind that comes when a heart finally collapses under the weight of its own pain. Rex approached quietly, his tail low, his gaze soft. He sniffed the air near her and whimpered, then rested his head gently against her knee. She froze again, then began to cry harder, her hand trembling as she touched his fur. "He saved her, didn't he?" Mark knelt down beside her. "Yes, he did." The woman's shoulders shook. "I didn't want to leave her," she said through tears. "But I had nowhere else to go. No money, no one to help. I thought if someone found her, she'd have a better chance." Mark listened in silence. Her words weren't excuses, they were confessions. The pain in her voice carried truth. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Lena," she whispered. "Lena Brooks," Mark nodded. "Lena, you did the hardest thing a mother could ever do. You gave her a chance to live. You didn't abandon her. You saved her in your own way." She shook her head, eyes swollen with tears. "I just wanted her safe. That's all." Mark reached out a steady hand. "Come with us. Let's make sure she knows who her mother really is." Rex gave a soft bark, as if agreeing. And in that quiet morning under the bridge, Lena finally stood, her steps weak, but her heart ready to face what came next. For the first time since she left that suitcase behind, she wasn't alone. The interrogation room was quiet. Too quiet. The hum of the fluorescent light above filled the silence between each heartbeat. Lena sat across the table, her hands folded in her lap, fingers trembling. A paper cup of water sat untouched before her. Mark stood by the glass wall, arms crossed, staring at the reflection of Rex waiting patiently outside. He'd questioned dozens of suspects before, criminals, smugglers, even human traffickers, but this felt different. Lena didn't have the cold defiance of guilt. She had the fragility of someone shattered by life itself. "I know what I did looks wrong," she said softly, breaking the silence. "But I didn't have a choice." Her voice cracked as tears gathered in her eyes. "I was living on the streets. No family, no shelter, no food. My baby was sick and I didn't even have money for a hospital." Mark swallowed hard. Every part of his training told him to remain objective. But another part, the human part, was listening not as an officer, but as a father who'd once lost his own child years ago. "You could have gone to a hospital," he said, trying to sound firm. "To social services. To anyone." She shook her head, tears spilling freely. "They turned me away. I went to 3 clinics. No ID, no insurance, no help. One nurse told me to try a church, but by then my baby could barely breathe. I panicked. I thought if I left her somewhere safe, someone would find her before it was too late." Mark closed his eyes for a moment, jaw tightening. The image of that gray suitcase flashed in his mind. The small body wrapped in blankets. The faint sound of life barely hanging on. Rex gave a low whine from outside the glass, as if sensing his inner turmoil. Another officer entered with paperwork. "We've confirmed her story," he said quietly. "She's clean, no record." The hospital verified. The baby was suffering from pneumonia and malnutrition. If not for Rex, she wouldn't have survived another hour. Mark looked at Lena again. Her eyes were hollow but filled with sincerity. He took a deep breath and finally said, "You didn't abandon your child, Lena. You saved her the only way you could." Her tears broke into sobs, a mix of grief and relief. And as Mark turned to leave, Rex pressed his paw against the glass, eyes locked on Lena's. Sometimes justice isn't about punishment. It's about understanding the pain behind a desperate act. 2 days later, the story was everywhere. News anchors spoke in hushed, reverent tones. Headlines splashed across every screen. K9 hero saves abandoned infant at airport. Rex, the dog who heard the cry of life. The once busy terminal now gleamed brighter than ever, not with fear, but with pride. Reporters gathered near Gate 12 where it had all happened, cameras flashing, lights glaring. Yet amid all the chaos, Rex sat calmly by Mark's side, chest puffed, eyes steady, unaware that the whole world now knew his name. Mark stood behind the podium, feeling the weight of the moment. Beside him, Rex wore his polished black K9 vest, the golden badge shining under the light. Airport officials, police officers, and families who'd witnessed the event filled the room. Everyone waited in silence as the police chief stepped forward. "Today," the chief began, "we honor a hero who reminded us that sometimes instinct and compassion can do what technology never could. This K9 Rex acted not out of training, but out of something deeper, empathy." The audience erupted into applause. Cameras clicked. Rex lifted his head, his ears perking up at the sound. As if realizing something important was happening, Mark knelt beside him, whispering, "This is your moment, buddy." Rex wagged his tail once. Calm and composed, the picture of a true professional. The chief continued, "If not for Rex's unwavering intuition, a newborn life would have been lost that day. We owe this miracle to his courage, and to the handler who trusted him completely." Mark stepped forward as the chief pinned a small medal onto Rex's vest, the Medal of Bravery. The applause grew louder, echoing across the terminal. Tears shimmered in the eyes of strangers who had never even met Rex but felt connected by the story. Mark took the microphone briefly. "Rex doesn't need words," he said softly. "He just listens, to instincts, to people, to hearts. That's what makes him a hero." Reporters shouted questions, but Mark didn't stay long. After the ceremony, he and Rex walked outside into the cool evening breeze. Away from cameras, Mark crouched down, meeting his partner's eyes. "You didn't just save that baby," he said quietly. "You saved her mother too." Rex nudged his hand, tail wagging gently. The sun dipped low, casting golden light across the runway. Heroes, Mark thought, don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they walk on four paws and hear what no one else can. The hospital room was quiet except for the soft beeping of machines and the faint hum of sunlight slipping through the blinds. In the crib near the window lay the tiny baby, pink blanket tucked under her chin, chest rising and falling in slow, peaceful rhythm. She looked stronger now, her cheeks no longer pale, her little hands curled into fists of new life. Mark stood by the doorway, his cap tucked under his arm, Rex sitting obediently beside him. The German shepherd's ears perked up as the door opened and Lena stepped in, escorted gently by a nurse. Her eyes were red from sleepless nights, her hands trembling, but this time her steps carried purpose. The moment she saw the baby, her breath caught. She froze mid-step, tears already streaming down her face. She's beautiful," she whispered, voice barely audible. The nurse nodded kindly and motioned her forward. Lena approached the crib slowly, almost afraid that if she got too close, the moment would vanish like a dream. She reached out with a shaking hand and touched her daughter's tiny fingers. The baby stirred, and when those small fingers wrapped around hers, Lena broke into quiet sobs. Mark looked away for a second, his throat tightening. Beside him, Rex tilted his head, letting out a soft whine, sensing the emotion filling the room. Lena turned to them, eyes filled with gratitude. "You saved her," she said, voice trembling. "If it wasn't for you, she wouldn't." Her voice cracked before she could finish. Mark shook his head gently. "You saved her, Lena. You did what you thought was best when the world gave you no choices." Rex just made sure the world listened. Rex took a slow step forward, sitting beside the crib. The baby's eyes fluttered open, catching the light. She stared at him curiously, then reached out her tiny hand toward his muzzle. Rex leaned in, letting her touch his fur, soft, gentle, pure. For a brief, wordless moment, everything stood still. A mother's redemption, a child's second chance, a dog's unspoken understanding. The nurse wiped her eyes quietly and whispered, "She's going to be okay." Lena bent down, kissing her daughter's forehead. "I'll never leave you again," she murmured. Mark smiled faintly, resting a hand on Rex's neck. "Come on, partner," he whispered. "Our job here's done." As they walked out, sunlight poured through the hallway, and for the first time in days, the world felt right again. Sometimes miracles aren't found in prayers or science. They're found in the heart of a loyal dog who refuses to walk away. A week later, the airport felt different. Travelers still hurried through the terminals, luggage still rolled across the shiny floors, but something unseen lingered in the air, a sense of quiet reverence. Near Gate 12, a small bronze plaque had been installed beside a photograph of Rex in his K9 vest. It read, "In honor of Rex, the dog who heard the silence and saved a life." Mark stood in front of it that morning, a coffee in one hand, Rex sitting tall beside him. The German shepherd's fur shimmered in the sunlight streaming through the glass windows. Passengers paused to read the plaque, some smiling, others wiping away tears. Mark knelt and scratched behind Rex's ear. "You realize you've become a legend, right?" he said softly. Rex looked up with calm eyes, tail thumping once, unbothered by fame, content just to be near his partner. The media had called it the miracle at Gate 12. But for Mark, it wasn't a miracle. It was instinct. It was loyalty. It was the bond between a man and his dog, something that could never be trained, only earned. He thought about Lena and her baby, now recovering in the hospital. The social workers had promised to help her rebuild her life, and a local charity had stepped in to cover her medical bills. The story had moved an entire city. Donations, letters, and messages of support poured in from people who said they had lost faith in humanity. Until now. "Funny," Mark murmured, watching a little boy point excitedly at Rex. "One bark, and you changed more lives than most people do in a lifetime." Rex gave a low, content grunt, as if to say it was worth it. As Mark turned to leave, an airport staff member stopped him. "Sir," she said, holding out an envelope. "This came for you." Inside was a simple note written in shaky handwriting. "To the officers who saved my baby, and to the dog who listened when no one else could, thank you. You didn't just save her, you saved me." Lena and Grace Mark folded the note gently, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Grace," he repeated softly. A fitting name. Outside, the roar of a departing plane filled the air. Mark looked down at Rex. "Ready for our next shift, partner?" Rex stood alert and proud, and as they walked away together, the world behind them kept moving. But for those who remembered that day, silence would never